Hello, welcome to Resilience Radio, Episode 12, Vermont Center for Integrative Herbalism. I'm Irvin Eisenberg, host of the show and owner of Resilience Occupational Therapy. As always, the opinions on this show are not necessarily shared by me. I like to showcase a variety of different perspectives. Additionally, it's not meant to be diagnostic or prescriptive in any way. Today's guests are two teachers from Vermont Center for Integrative Herbalism, that's Vcih, which is a clinical herb school in central Vermont. Full disclosure, my wife, Rebecca Dalgan, is a graduate of Vcih, so I know of the school from other ways. In any case, our guests are Betzy Bancroft and Kristin Henningsen. Great to have you both on.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
So I was wondering if you could each sort of start off by defining herbalism.
It's a big question. I guess one definition that comes to my mind is that it's really this tradition of working with the plants, living with the plants, learning from the plants, and really using that knowledge for connection and healing.
Yeah, I agree with what Kristin said. It's relationship with plants. It's reliance on plants. Like when we practice as herbalists, like even if we're a folk herbalist or, the plants are what we go to. Plants are who we have faith in, and by extension, nature. It's also working with nature is what herb medicine, herbalism is too.
Okay. So I wanted to give you, I didn't give a full bio introduction for both of you. I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell me how you got interested in herbalism and what your background in herbalism is, and sort of give me the narrative starting from why you became interested in herbalism, what your sort of credentials are, and then how you found your way to Vcih. And whoever wants to go first on that.
Go for it, Betzy.
Yeah, I'll go first because I'm one of the founders of Vcih. So finding my way there, kind of helped make it happen. But my evolution and all of that is really having grown up hanging out in nature a lot. I grew up in rapidly suburbanizing New Jersey, but there was still at that point some wild areas around me, and I grew up, eating wild berries and hanging out in the forest and so forth. And then shortly after college, I met David Winston, just like not even connected with herbs. And but I was already interested in nutrition a little bit, and I was already sort of curious and dabbling in herb medicine through college and early time after that. But then once I met Winston, he like twisted my arm and convinced me to come to his herb school. And then I started working for his herb company, Herbalist and Alchemist. And then I was completely immersed between taking his program, which in the class I was in ended up being like 3 years. Usually his is a 2-year program, but we didn't leave. And for a variety of reasons, our class was 3 years. And it was really quite different in those days because we went for lots and lots of herb walks. So again, that connection with the plants was instilled deep in me. And then I just I stayed in the herb world ever since. And then in 2003, I moved to Vermont and was welcomed by the herbalists in this community, some of which I had met. Some of them I knew a little bit, some of them I had just met briefly, but they welcomed me very warmly and invited me to practice. They had a little practice that had grown out of Rosemary's Advanced Herbal Studies program. And Guido was practicing with them, as well as some of, like I said, Rosemary's students. So he didn't actually study with Rosemary, but he was part of the community for sure. And so I started to practice with the Sage Mountain Free Herbal Clinic group. And then we sort of also, especially after Larkin got back from Thai Sophia, we crystallized the Vermont Center for Integrative Herbalism and made that happen.
So for the listeners who don't know as much about Vcih, the founding herbalists were yourself, Guido, and Larkin.
Yeah, with some other friends who were also played a role in the founding of it, but we were the director faculty people. Mm-hmm. And I'm still there. Still enjoying teaching so much.
And what was your college education in?
Well, I have a Bachelor of Fine Art in ceramics. And I really wish I had known that it was possible to grow up to be an herbalist in those days, because I would have taken more science. I got A's in biology, but I regret not having taken botany and chemistry and ecology in undergraduate. I've caught up on a lot of those concepts. But yeah, it would have been handy to have it in college and had that foundation. But yeah, I didn't know what I was going to be when I grew up. I didn't know you could be an herbalist when I was in college.
Okay, and Kristin, can you share your background?
Yeah, so I was the opposite. I had a lot of science. I also didn't know you could really grow up to be an herbalist, but I kind of found my way to herbalism. I really fell in love with it in the desert Southwest, actually. I was living in the mountains of northern Arizona, going to school, and I was actually studying ethnobotany. And so looking at the ways that people were utilizing plants, I just got really interested in how folks were using medicinal plants traditionally. And that's just such an amazing region to fall in love with plants with, because there's, in northern Arizona, you can go from the top of the San Francisco Peaks all the way down to Sonoran Desert. So you have all like 7 life zones. So you really get to know like the diversity of the plants and how they, evolve and how they adjust to climate. And there's also a really diverse connection of indigenous tribes in the area utilizing these plants as well. There's 13 indigenous tribes in the area that are still using the San Francisco Peaks, which is the big mountain range in that area. They still tend medicinal gardens there. So it is really like a hot spot of medicinal plants and uses. And so I really kind of fell in love with the plants there even more so. And there's a great herbalist in that area who really became a big mentor and friend, Phyllis Hogan. And I worked with her quite a bit. And at that time, Michael Moore was still teaching down at the Southwest School of Botanical Medicine down in Betzy, Arizona. So I'd like run down there and get some classes and like hang out with Phyllis and, get mentored. And I just kind of kept going with that in my studies and in my own personal exploration. So I took like a correspondence class from Phyllis Light. And all of that was really feeding the drive I had to learn more about the plants and stay in connection with them. And what I really was missing was like the clinical focus. And so I ended up studying with Michael and Leslie Tierra in Santa Cruz, California. They had a clinical program there as well. And so I felt like I got to fill a little bit of that hole there. And then just kind of, haven't stopped. And as far as how I came to Vcih, because I was so interested in the clinical side of things, I definitely knew about Vcih for several years, really admired the curriculum. And it's really well renowned in the herbal community, and the programming that you guys put together, Betzy, was just like amazing. So I'd already been kind of practicing at my own clinical practice for a few years, but when I saw there was a faculty position opening up for Vcih, I just kind of went for it. And moved my whole family from Texas, where I was living at the time, to Vermont about 4 years ago now. And I haven't looked back. It's been a really great experience.
We were very, very fortunate to have Kristin apply and arrive with us. And I saw Phyllis Hogan in the middle there, like after we'd hired Kristin, before she actually arrived in Vermont. I went to the Herbalist Guild conference, and Phyllis was the keynote speaker, and she said, "You're gonna love Kristin," and we certainly have.
So I've got sort of a mix of people who will be listening to this podcast. Some people are very familiar with the herbal world and are recognizing all the names you're mentioning, and and a lot of people, the idea of herbalism is still more fringe, or just they're not as familiar with. So could you speak to sort of the different types of herbalism that are out there, and backgrounds you've had, and sort of the different, it's multi-part question, I suppose, but the different sort of flavors of herbalism and communities, and then where within that landscape VCIH, what's its role, what makes it unique?
Do you want to go first? Do you want me to?
Well, do you want to start? I'm just like thinking about the different kinds of herbalism out there, and there's many, right? But I can describe clinical herbalism a little bit more in depth, and have really been kind of diving into that. But do you want to start with like folk herbalism?
Sure.
Would that be a good place?
And I will
to
mention
start
that earlier this season we've had Rosemary Gladstar and Helen Ward on talking about folk, and I mean, I think most herbalists would probably describe themselves as eclectic to some degree, but sort of folk and community herbalism, and so we have some of that perspective, but it's always good to hear from different people how they define things.
Well, it starts with connection with plants. It starts with, are you using plants? Are you ingesting, smelling, enjoying, being nourished by plants? Are they, how are you relating to plants? So a folk herbalist is one basically who has plants in their life. They rely on, rather than popping a pill, they make a cup of tea. You know what I mean? And that builds on itself. One of the key things about what we do is we have an amazing history. As Kristin pointed out earlier, the tradition of herbal medicine is really important. So we have an enormous amount of experience with plants. And we use the same plants our ancestors used. It's like there's not new things. I mean, there's new science, there's new understandings, especially of how they work and so forth. But like, we're still using plants for the very similar ways. So folk herbalism is just like, you have plants in your life. That's what your go-to, your preferred type of remedy. And then it also bleeds way into like anything you do in the kitchen, from cooking to fermenting to making beverages, like kitchen herbal medicine, folk herbal medicine. It's really kind of the same thing. Folk herbal medicine from the kitchen. And that bleeds into all the culinary stuff, there's a huge overlap between cooking and herb medicine. Especially when you get into some of the like well-organized traditions like Ayurveda and TCM or Chinese medicine generally. Like food is a huge part of those healing constructs. You don't leave that out with the herbs. But then, and then there's people get more deeply into it, learn more, take some classes, get more and more into it. And I'm going to mostly stop there. But I think one of the key things that makes clinical herbalism different, besides the level of education and whatnot, is that clinical herbalists are going for the roots, pun intended, very, very strongly, that we're actually making assessments. We're not looking like, oh, you have a headache, take some whatever, or bellyache, better bellyache, take some chamomile or peppermint, right? But yeah, like, why do you have a bellyache or why do you have a headache? That's what clinical herbalists do.
So it's the diagnostic component of that makes it unique.
We can't call it that.
The assessing, the type of assessment.
Yes. And Kristin's really good at that. She'll talk about it.
No, I agree 100% with everything you said, Betzy. It is kind of just that background layer of information that we're taking and layering on into our work with the individual. I feel like clinical herbalism sometimes it seems like just the word, it seems like a little sterile. Like it seems like we're removed from the plants, but it's really, I mean, it's not. I think that while clinical herbalists have, a lot of love, and we definitely geek out on the technical and scientific aspects of herbalism, and we'll dig into like peer-reviewed research quite a bit. We also love literally digging in the dirt and are still, in the kitchen and, incorporating these plants into our everyday life. So for me, it's kind of this combination of like working with the plants on this microscopic level, like what are the herbal constituents doing to us at a cellular level, right? Like what is the effect that they're having on a cellular level, all the way out to the macroscopic level, like how is it affecting our energetics? What kind of plant communities are they, are the plants living in? What are they telling us? And then kind of layering all of that with the folks that we work with and seeing how, what patterns are they presenting, and then how can we apply that knowledge to balance out their patterns, right? It's all really about that ultimately, helping folks find the balance.
And one of the really cool things that I love about clinical herbalism in the 21st century is that we don't have to leave anything out. We have the science, we have the clinical trials as well as the pharmacological studies that tell us how physiologically the plants are working. But at the same time, like I'll have a formula with very, some of the ingredients very pharmacological, again, based on the science. And then there will be one or two in there for their signature. The doctrine of signatures is this ancient philosophy of that nature or God or whoever you believe created plants, put clues in the plants to tell you who they are and how they work. And like, for example, we talk a lot about, and I'm borrowing from a student, thorn medicine. Plants like rose and hawthorn with thorns, they're like hawthorn, for example, is physiologically working on our heart. There is great science around how hawthorn benefits the heart and helps it be more efficient in its oxygen use and all kinds of other interesting, science details. But it's also like quintessential heart medicine, it's got the red berries, and it's so like we don't have to throw the old stuff out, and we just like the science explains the tradition. I think that's one of the exciting things about being a clinical herbalist in the 21st century is like we can have it all.
So when it comes to sort of safety in herbal medicine, I know there's sort of two major critiques of herbalism. One is that it's either sort of ineffective or that it's too effective and unsafe, and that how do you control for proper dosing? So how do you make sure you're safe and effective?
I mean, that's where, knowing about the pharmacology really comes in, and doing really thorough research on herb-drug interactions, staying current with the current research and, the case studies that are coming out. I mean, that's part of the work, is staying kind of one foot, like one step ahead, you know what I mean? So learning those drug interactions are really important, and being really thorough with intakes too, I think is also important, is, asking the folks that you're working with, like what kind of medications are you taking, and having that conversation, and then making sure that you're doing the legwork, that there isn't any of those interactions. And then the other thing that I always am, trying to strive for too, is like, let's not give a giant heroic dose right away. Like, let's start small and, see how it feels in a body to the individual. And then we can always slowly increase the dose to get the, the therapeutic result that we want. But it's really important for folks to like see how they are interacting with the plant too. They're forming relationships with plants too, right? Anytime that they're taking those herbs into their body. So how is it affecting them physiologically? How is it affecting their mental, emotional state? And if it doesn't feel good, we can try something else.
I grew up with my mother being an herbalist, and she was very much a Matthew Wood herbalist. And Matthew Wood's known for his lower dosage. That fit for my mother's constitution well. She's very sensitive to herbs. She can be near an herb and start having an effect without actually ingesting it. So I was given drops of a tincture, and we'd count out drops very carefully. And and herbalism, I appreciated it, but I never really felt like I didn't know that it worked beyond like a psychological level. And then the first time my wife, who's studying herbalism, came, I got sick, and my wife, instead of giving me, I said, okay, so how much echinacea should I be taking? And she said, oh, start off with like 4 or 5 dropperfuls. I said, you mean drops? She said, no, dropperfuls. And I might have the dosage entirely off here. And I was both startled by that, and then when I took it, I felt effect. So I remember being very surprised by wait, herbs can actually do something, for my system. It had almost been taken on faith prior, and then I was able to feel what that was. So I'm imagining that from what you're saying, that the clinical herbalist, there might be the clinical dosage, and you might start off more in that gentle realm, but you're trying to figure out what's effective for that individual person, versus it being this sort of more tentative folk medicine. That, not to say all folk herbalists are as tentative around and careful as my mother was with me.
Well, again, there's room for multiple different philosophies, and that's one of the beautiful things. Actually, one of the things I say, when I teach an introductory class, or I'm introducing people to herb medicine, is what is one of the fundamental differences between plant medicine and other forms of healing? And my answer is that plants are living beings, right? So they have spirits, they have chemicals, they have flavors, they have, their own personality and beingness, so they work on all those levels. So they can work in little tiny doses, especially for subtle kinds of things, and with really sensitive people. So that's one of the things, why clinical herbalists are who we are. Well, first of all, another big difference between clinical herbalists and other practitioners is we take at least an hour to interview somebody. It's none of this 7-minute business. So how sensitive someone is one of the key things that we want to assess, because I've seen people react to incredibly tiny doses in profound ways, versus I've seen people take an ounce and it just, oh, okay, yeah, nice, and the other thing I wanted to say is that with respect to efficacy and safety, is I'm not sure how many people out there are even aware of the amazing amount of science on herbal medicine that goes on, mostly in other places on the planet, in the East and the Middle East. And it's not as much done in the United States, but there is a lot of really good, really well done science on plant medicine, going on around the world. So, we're clued into that. Thank you to the internet. But I think that there's a lot more to the situation. And that's why it's important to have the education and spend the time and understand how to create or arrive at a proper assessment, so that we know what the dose that a given person should take of a given herb. We're coming from a place of experience and knowledge, rather than, well, let's try this, And always start low and go slow.
So that sort of leads us into, could you describe what the VCIH curriculum looks like?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll start with that one, because I used to teach a lot of the Roots program. When we started out being interested in doing this clinical thing. So year 1, year 2, year 3, year 1 is called the Family Herbalist program, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but it's evolved to be more of its own thing. Right in the very beginning, it was kind of oh yeah, these people are going to be funneling into this other program. So the Family Herbalist program has morphed a little bit to be more of a standalone, family herbalist, take care of your family and your immediate loved ones. And And then we added the Roots program as the sort of basic beginner class, because we had a lot of beginner people applying. Then we were like, wait a minute, we need a beginner class. So that program is especially focused on gardening, growing herbs, processing medicine, like simple, home remedy medicine making. But it's a very home remedies and growing, harvesting, processing. And then the family herbalist does a little bit of that, but it's more like even more home remedies. And then I'll let Kristin speak to some of the curriculum too, because Kristin and I teach a lot of the family program. And it's got some background science, but again, like the practical home remedies and how to do that efficaciously and safely. Like there's a lot of safety stuff, not the drug interaction so much, but like red flags, like how to know when someone's getting dehydrated and it's time to go to the urgent care, right?
Yeah, I think the family program is, it is like a really strong standalone program on its own. I mean, I teach the anatomy and holistic anatomy and physiology within that program. And we kind of go through, each system of the body, and we talk about what plants are, how it can be integrated within those as well. And the thing that I think has been really brilliant that with the development of the curriculum, I had nothing to do with, but is the fact that, the systems of the body that we focus on, we try to also like layer in the materia medica that are appropriate for that system. So if we're talking about the cardiovascular system, the materia medica classes for that section will be a lot of herbs that are supportive for the heart. And at the same time, starting to layer in the therapeutics classes, which is basically like, what do we do for, conditions of the heart? What do we do for high blood pressure? What do we do for low blood pressure? And trying to kind of layer that all in kind of at the same time. So we're like in cardiovascular land for a month, and then we're in generative land, and we're talking about these different systems of the body. And I really love the way that's layered in. And then in addition to that, there's also botany, like actually a really pretty deep dive into botany that Lisa Olson has been teaching in the past, which is pretty amazing. And you do some nutrition classes as well, right, Betzy?
Yeah, the family program has food as medicine, and then there's also an actions in chemistry too. So like basic plant chemicals, like tannins are responsible for astringency, and this is what astringency is. So yeah, basic foundation sciences in the family class, and then we get a little deeper into the sciences in the clinical class. So then the clinical program is 2 years, and it's 2 days a week for 2 years. So it's, really a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of, those students are amazing. They work really hard, but they graduate being really solid herbalists. So again, and then in second year, they get nutrition pharmacology. As Kristin is saying, they get a lot deeper into the therapeutics of like, how is inflammation actually working, and how is, the nervous system, what's going on with the nervous system. And then also throughout the family program and the clinical program, there's a lot of social justice and like understanding how our lives impact our health, and how the world impacts our health as well. Because, do you even have access to good food? Yeah, okay, great. You know what good food is, but can you get it? So yeah, there's a lot of other things all woven in there, the science and the social justice and the connection with plants. We never lose that. Even though we get really sciencey towards the clinical years, we're still talking about spirits. We're still talking about community. We're still talking about the plants as beings. So And I that's one of the things I like about our school is that we have one foot very firmly in science, but the other foot is still very firmly in love and tradition and energetics. You hear that word. What we mean by that is like hot, cold, because hot means fast, cold means slow. Like, where are you? What is your personal rate, right? Your constitution and where you're at. How damp, how dry are you? Why? Like the functioning of your systems. Like very old ways that herbalists looked at people. But then again, we have all this new layers of herb drug interactions. And so it's really, like I said, fascinating 21st century herbal medicine.
I think it's a great description, Betzy, and I just want to add on that a little bit. With your description of 1 foot in science and 1 foot, like still very much with the plants. I mean, like literally in the garden. So in the family program, we are in the garden harvesting, teaching harvesting methods, teaching plant medicine methods, how to make tinctures, how to make teas, poultices, steadies, like the medicine making wonder, our guru. And then it's the same even when we get into the clinical year in year 2. Like, yes, we have pathophysiology classes, we have research skills classes and ethics classes, but then we also are still in the garden. Like, we're still out there harvesting and making medicine and having the students help out in the lab and actually make medicine for the apothecary, for the clinic that they will then be working in the 3rd year. Do you want to speak a little bit more about like the 3rd year, Betzy?
Sure. The 3rd year students, well, first of all, like it's gotten a little, as I said, we added the roots program. So it's now 0, 1, 2, 3. So we say 3rd year students. Some of those students have actually been with us for 4 years. And, but they get like even more into it and they have an actual clinic. So we have a professional clinic that Kristin and I are part of. But then we have the students clinic and in all of our clinics, or both of our clinics, the student and the professional clinics, are sliding scale. So hopefully they are accessible to a wide variety of folks. And the sliding scale is for the appointment and the herbs. And we have a little apothecary, as Kristin said. One of the other beautiful things is what we've been trying to do is weave in the production, like the growing of the herbs and the making of the medicine into learning about those things. But then also, and by the time the students are clinicians or intern clinicians in the 3rd year, they're dispensing and recommending the tinctures that they helped make from the herbs that they helped grow, which is a beautiful continuum. And also empowers us. It's the other really awesome thing about herb medicine is like our materia medica, which means the plants we use, are all around us. You know what I mean? Like they're there. And so how to identify them and, procure them and then make the medicine is really key. But so the students are under our wings, but they see their own clients. They find their clients, connect with people. They get a little over an hour to meet with that person, and then they chat with us about the person, and we meet the person. Lately, it's been like looking at their Zoom window, but in ideal situations, we meet the person, we look at their tongue, we take their pulse, so that helps confirm for the students what they're feeling and seeing, because those are assessment skills that are really important. Because again, like not just, our goal is to get to those roots, like not just, oh, you have a bellyache, here, take some peppermint chamomile, like why, like we want to know why. So what their tongue looks like gives us really useful information and understanding what might be going on in their stomach. So then we are, again, with them throughout the process of them deciding what's going on, that is making those assessments, documenting them in a certain format, and then signing off on everything that they recommend. So So the students are supervised by the professionals, largely the faculty. Pretty much we're the faculty. So we're supervising them, mentoring them, but they're doing the work. They're seeing actual clients, and believe me, they get some interesting people, and they have really helped a lot of people with a lot of things. The student clinic outcomes are often very excellent.
So you're talking about a model that seems to it feels similar in some ways to the medical model, in the sense of people have their internships and rotations, and it seems like third year is your clinician under the supervision of instructors. It sort of leads me to ask about the role of herbalism versus more accepted healthcare practices like naturopathic medicine and osteopathic medicine, and as well as sort of what's your scope versus these professions, and what's sort of the legalities that you have to be concerned with?
Well, there's definitely legalities to be concerned with. We don't diagnose, we don't prescribe, anything like that. Herbalists are not licensed in the US, and we actually prefer it that way. Many herbalists prefer it that way because there's so many different kinds and ways of knowing the plants and working with the plants. And so, we really honor all those traditions. So that said, we just really, as far as, our scope of practice, we are working with individual, and we are assessing the kind of overall pattern that's presenting, and using herbs in a way that's going to support them, but also working very integratively as well. I definitely have clients that they're also seeing naturopaths. I might recommend body work for them if it's something that I feel is appropriate. Doing a lot with nutrition. Herbs do a lot of things, but there's a lot of things that herbs also can't touch. So I think that this ability to work across disciplines and form like a community network is also like a really big, important part of the work that herbalists do. How can we best support a person? Sometimes that's by, referring them out somewhere else.
So why would someone go to an herbalist or go to the clinic versus see one of the naturopaths in the area?
I think there's a few reasons. One is sometimes people have something that isn't easily diagnosed, and I mean by the docs. There's something, I'm still you take all your tests and you tell me I'm fine, but I know I'm not quite fine. That's one of the types of people who come to see herbalists. And also I think that we can work with subtler things. We can work with disharmonies and imbalances that are maybe a little bit more fuzzy than what physicians work with, in terms of maybe their numbers are not in the disease realm or whatever it is. But herbalists can work really easily and well with those kinds of subtleties, and especially things like tuning our systems, improving our digestive function. Herbs can do that. They can increase our secretions and normalize our motility and things like that. So herbs can work in subtler, more tonic ways, tonic in the sense of just making things better. So that, for example, if your digestion works better, maybe you can make the most of the treatment that the naturopath is giving you. Or maybe your problem is because your gut is impaired and we need to heal some tissue there, or help the joints be better lubricated, or, you know what I mean? So herbs can work on some more subtler kinds of things that are not overt disease statuses. But just, again, make things work better, help the person feel better, function better. And then the other thing, you asked about scope, and I find that a fascinating question. I think our scope is nature. like, yeah, one of the really important things is to be able to recognize the signs of like something really bad is going on and you're out of the realm of herbalists, but like kinds of things that I recommend are like walks in the woods. And yes, we have clinical studies now, like actual science showing that walks in the woods do a bunch of really good things for us. Connection with plants. I have recommended tree hugging and earth lying and weird things like talismans. Like those kind of things, like the energy and energy in the sense of the beingness of nature is part of what helps heal us. And it's because fundamentally we are nature, right? We're not like these robot machines that you just need a little, tinker here, tinker there. No, actually we're living beings too. And so again, nature helps us balance. Nature helps us nourish and heal.
Yeah, I think I really love the way that you just described that, Betzy. And I think what also kind of comes up for me is that, oftentimes folks get like a diagnosis, right? And then they're just looked at from like the, Western medical model, and then they're just looked at as that diagnosis, right? Like we don't support folks with high blood pressure the same way, right? For every single person. We support people rather than just, identifying a specific issue and just working with that the same way. Everyone has, will exhibit a cold a little bit differently. Everyone will have a little bit different digestive imbalances. Those are going to show up a little differently. And so that idea of really getting to know the person and those subtle imbalances, the energetics behind it. Yeah, maybe they need more connection to nature, maybe they need a little more grounding, and that's going to support them. I think that absolutely is a big part of what herbalists do, is like supporting the person rather than just, treating a disease, which is unfortunately, a very common thing in the major Western models.
As you two may or may not know, or know to varying degrees, I have sort of two different scopes as a practitioner myself, one being the more biomechanical fascia, the structural integration work I do. So I'm looking at how's the body moving in space, and how are the tendons and ligaments and muscles and bones lining up the way they that is most useful for that person. And then I have my occupational therapy hat, which I use as the umbrella that the other work goes under at this point. And occupational therapy is meaningful activities, which is sort of a vague occupation being defined as activities that are meaningfully what occupies your time. And I've played around with the idea of, well, because occupational therapy is licensed and insurance under many circumstances will cover, how can I bridge some of the more alternative medicines into the more medical model so that people can get the coverage that they need? And I've thought about well, could I be an herbalist as an occupational therapist? I went, well, no, because I'm not. As soon as the herbs pass the lips and I'm dealing with sort of the biochemistry is not within my scope. But if I were working with an herbalist and they were saying, hey, take these herbs, I might be able to say, based on this person's patterns of their day, might be best to try to look at this as a 2-dose thing and as a cup of tea at this particular time of day. And that aspect, which I think is definitely overlaps with what you've been describing of herbalism, taking a walk, the best way to ingest, the best way to consume, not what it is consumed of the plant and such. So those are things that I think about in med management, would be the technical term that OTs might use. Okay, how do we make sure you take your pills? How do we make sure you actually take your supplements and things that are meaningful to you? Is within my scope. So it's just interesting thinking about people's scope of practice is something that always fascinates me, especially as it gets more refined and important, because what we take into our body really is important.
Scope is important, and we definitely reinforce that all through the levels of the programs that we offer. Like Roots program, they have very strong, stay in this scope, and in family class, we go over the red flags every therapeutics class, like when this is not for you to deal with anymore. And even in the therapeutics and the clinical realm, we're careful about our scope, because we don't want to hurt anybody. We also don't want to give anybody false hope. But I don't want to take drugs. Don't make me go to the doctor. But for this, you really should go to the doctor. You should get an actual diagnosis. You don't have to take their drugs if you don't want to, but you really should see the doctor. But that's really, really important for us to know. Especially as Kristin said, we're not licensed practitioners in the United States. So there's, that vulnerability. But yeah, we have to recognize where it's safe for us to, what's safe for us to recommend. We don't tell people to stop taking their medications. That's way not in the safe zone. But it's really, really important. Again, not just the individual person's safety, but partly, I think, also because we're not licensed, and as you've pointed out, a lot of people don't relate to herbal medicine or recognize it as a safe and effective healing mode. We have a responsibility also to not hurt people. Well, obviously, we have a responsibility to not hurt people. But we have a responsibility to our community, to our profession, to uphold the best standard for the benefit of the entire community, because we know that a little bit gets amplified, and so I think we're very responsible about that.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that real quick. Another big responsibility we have is to the plants themselves. So not recommending the most obscure endangered plant in high dosages, finding another plant that is abundant, right? And still, the goal is always what's the most effective dose with the least amount of plant, how can we really utilize the least amount of plants and have it be the most effective? So not saying, oh no, it's fine, drink, 15 gallons of tea a day. No one's going to do that. And we're going to also, we wouldn't be being very responsible to the plants themselves. So having that connection still and having that responsibility is also a big part of what we do.
Yeah. Responsibility to the plants and the earth, because that's where they come from. Absolutely. And, clinical herbalists, we don't all of a sudden graduate away from dandelion, we still use dandelions and chamomile, and we still use simple plants. But we just, maybe use more different plants, but we don't graduate from the weeds.
So where do you see or hope to see herbalism in another 20 or 40 years? It's changed a lot in the in the last 20, I would say. And what do you hope for herbalism?
I guess one of my hopes is that it'll continue to be propped up. It'll continue to be researched and developed, and certainly finding the most effective therapeutic dosages for certain plants, certainly, but also at the same time, moving away from this model that echinacea is going to cure everybody's cold the same way, or take this particular herb. It's the new hot thing to lose weight. I just see some overlap happening with supplement industry and herbal industry, and I just don't think it's it's not being responsible to the plants or the people. So I feel like my hope is that there's going to be a little bit more of this refinement of an understanding that, this is accessible medicine, that's there for us. But we also need to continue to have that responsibility to the earth and, make those actual connections with the plants instead of just, buying the supplement off the shelf that you heard, the latest celebrity using. Making real connections, I think, is where I am hoping it'll kind of continue to move in that direction.
Yeah, I'm with Kristin on that. I think that's super, super important. And then the larger, as we have matured and continue to mature as practitioners and as a community, I hope that herbal medicine can be part of the solutions in both conceptual and physical, in the sense of, again, like access to medicine, that will be part of the bigger solution in helping humanity find a better relationship with the earth, because it is, again, we keep saying that over and over again, relationship with nature. But that's like one of the fundamental things humans at this point in time got to get, we got to get that, and how important and how important it is to us as well as the rest of the great life. And so, yeah, if herbal medicine can help those connections be made and deepened and strengthened, and also helping people get access to really good medicine, like pharmaceuticals are more and more and more and more and more expensive, and people are on more and more and more number of different ones. So I also think that helping people be healthier is also a goal for the herbal community as a whole.
Okay. Well, thank you both so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, it's been fun.
I hope you enjoyed this episode with Kristin and Betzy. If so, please give it a positive review on the podcatcher of your choice. You've been listening to Resilience Radio. Take care.